Hey everybody, Ben here with Midwest Climate Engineering Watch, and today we're going to discuss the centralization of police powers. Now, this will continue down the theme of centralized government. And how are they centralizing the police powers? Well, one is they underfund the police force. How so, you may ask? Well, one, first and foremost, look how poorly trained and underfunded law enforcement is to begin with. These guys go to academy 6.5, 7 months on average. They go out there, learn everything they need to know about the academy, get on the field training program for 3 to 4 months, and then they're on the road. And after that, it is one 8-hour training course every quarter. Some do additional online training, some do, sometimes you can sign up for your own classes, pay for your own classes, and go from there. That is amazingly sad. Even the military, even people in the National Guard and the reserves have a 2-week course a year that they go to, that they attend to refresh and do the training that they need to do to get back into the groove of things. And law enforcement doesn't get that opportunity. It's like Jocko Willink said on a Rogan podcast, whenever they do a raid or a mission, it takes them 16 to 18 months to train up to that mission before they do it. With law enforcement, there is no training. Jocko Willink also suggested that 1/3 of the time spent a day should be used to utilize training tactics, whether it's de-escalation, self-defense, shooting, something of that nature, instead of just throwing these people out on the road in cold feet. Unfortunately, that's not the reality. What really happens is they get severely underfunded, and then when the opportunity comes in for more funding, the chiefs and power structure in the police forces usually utilize those abilities and abuse their community to get more funding from the federal government. Who was one of the biggest culprits behind the militarization of the police force? And are the police really militarized? We're going to look into that today. So first and foremost, one of the leading person who helped militarize the police was Barack Obama himself, former president of the United States. We all remember him. Here's a quote that directly came out from him about centralizing law enforcement, centralizing the powers. He says, "We cannot continue to rely on our military in order to achieve national security objectives that we've set. We've got to have a civilian national security force that's just as powerful, just as strong, just as well funded." That is scary. And Obama also turned to the media and asked them, he said, "I expect our friends in the media to really focus on what's in this report and pay attention to it." He's referring to the report of the Task Force on 21st Century Policing. Obama found other ways to nationalize or militarize the police force. Here's some of the ways he also managed to pull this off. First and foremost is the generous Pentagon funding. The Pentagon gave $500 million to reutilization of military equipment to law enforcement. Then there's the burden grants. These grants have created to create multi-jurisdictional anti-drug, anti-gang task forces all over the country. These task forces usually cover more than one jurisdiction. They often aren't fully accountable to, say, a police chief or elected a sheriff. Moreover, they're often funded with either additional burden grants or with money seized in asset forfeiture proceedings. They can operate with little or no funding from the polities they police. Excuse me. This, as a result, has caused excessive use of force from the specialized units, such as SWAT teams and these anti-crime, anti-drug gangs. They go after the problems in the community, and as a result, they shake down everybody they possibly can to seize more money and assets from the war on drugs, which has been absolute failure. Due to the fact that the CIA and other government agencies are the key drug dealers in our country, how do you stop the war on drugs? You don't. Problem, reaction, solution. The Hegelian dialect. They create the problem, they wait for the reaction, and this is their solution. So they create the problem of drugs, they create the problem of low-funded police force, and they wait for the reaction of the community outrage of the impact of the drugs, of the overworked police, and their solution is, well, let's throw more heavy equipment and guns to the law enforcement. Along with this, of the additional things that Obama's done, it's the cops grants. These grants are supposed to be meant for community policing incentives, but what ends up happening is the community policing initiatives to stop piling weapons and grenades are totally incompatible. And that's what ends up happening with that grant. They use that money to stockpile more weapons, grenade launchers, and so on and so forth. Biden often takes credit for creating the program and claims it's responsible for the sharp drop in violent crime in America that began in the mid-1990s. And so, Obama resurrected Cops 2. During the first year in office, he increased the program's budget by 250%. Then you have the DHS anti-terror grants. These grants, the federal government handed out $34 billion since September 11, 2001. The grants have also given rise to contractors that now cater to police agencies looking to cash DHS checks in exchange for battle-grade gear. All which means now there's an industry, inevitably a lobbyist interest, dedicated to perpetuating police militarization. Obama also assisted with the medical marijuana raids. He stepped up the heavy-handed raids often used to enforce immigration laws. In 2012, his administration deported more than any other year in American history. He's on pace to deport 2 million people by 2014, a figure equal to the total number of people ever deported from America until 1997. The Obama administration also defended heavy-handed police tactics. The Obama administration has defended the use of aggressive militaristic police actions in court. In the case of Vina versus U.S., DEA agents have pointed their guns at an 11-year-old and a 14-year-old during a drug raid on the wrong house. The agents had apparently mistaken the license plate of a suspected drug trafficker for the plate on a car owned by Thomas Avina. Obama's Justice Department argued in federal court that the lawsuit should be dismissed before being heard by a jury because the agents' actions were not unreasonable. Well, and then you have asset forfeiture, which in its own is a huge problem. Under the policy of asset forfeiture, the government can seize any cash, cars, houses, or any property that law enforcement can reasonably connect to a crime, usually a drug crime. The owner of the property must then go to court to show that he legitimately earns or owns it. Often the drug owner is never actually charged with a crime, and often these seizures are made against the people suspected of low-level crimes. So the value of property seized can be less than the costs and hassles of hiring an attorney and going to court to win it back. Under Obama, asset forfeiture flourished, according to a 2012 report from General Accounting Office. The Justice Department's forfeiture funds swelled to $1.8 billion in 2011, the largest ever. The same year, equitable sharing payouts to local police agencies topped $445 million, also a record. Obama also fought for broad asset forfeiture powers in court, even for local governments. In 2009 case Alvarez versus Smith, Obama administration defended a provision of Illinois' assets forfeiture law that allows police to seize property they believe is connected to drug activity with little evidence, then hold up to 6 months before the owner gets an opportunity to win it back in court. It is one of the harshest such laws in the country. Amazing. And yet you have people going around saying that Obama was an amazing president. Never mind that he specifically went after low-income families with civil asset forfeiture laws, heavily militarized the police force, which, again, I will be on the other side of the spectrum and say yes and no on. Because the SWAT teams are a needed necessity. They need to be there. Whenever you have an active shooter, somebody who's there with huge set of weaponry, a pistol cannot do the trick. Sure, a well-placed shot will, but under the most harshest conditions of adrenaline pumping, of blood pumping, those heavy rifles are needed. The grenade launchers are needed for crowd control. Protests are fine, but riots and looting are not. But to go along the lines of why I don't believe the militarization is entirely true, finding that all these law enforcement agencies have this equipment, I have yet to see tanks driving around the roads from these law enforcement agencies. I've yet to see tanks with sirens and police lights driving up and down roads never-endingly. I've yet to see checkpoints with these police tanks and SWAT gear. Stop after stop after stop in the intersection. I've yet to see any of this. It is understandable that these programs of asset forfeiture, of the Burns grants, of the COPS grants, has incentivized law enforcement to take a heavy-handed approach against low-income, low drug dealers, and as a result, done damage and trust to the community due to the fact that these low-level dealers, a majority of them are not violent. So therefore, they chase the money to get the resources from the federal government, But that problem was already created by the federal government because of the lack of funding. How can the military get trillions of dollars year after year, and their budget get increased year after year, but law enforcement has no budget increase at all? Now, this budget increase does not mean that they should take their surveillance state and expand it into local law enforcement, which they already have. But it means that they should use that money for training, for better equipment, for the longevity of the officer, not so much so for the spying and the utilization of government powers against civilians. The reality of the matter is, as law enforcement gets defunded and taken away and becomes centralized into the federal government, the states lose their rights. The municipalities within the states lose their rights, and they lose their identity. When law enforcement becomes federalized, a police officer in Missouri can get transferred or move himself to somewhere in California, and as a result, there would be no need to understand or care for the community. They go in, they do their job, and then they leave, and they just bounce around to the next state, the next municipality, so on and so forth. Local law enforcement, state law enforcement does have a lot they need to work on. So much so. But it starts with the leadership. It starts with police leadership. It starts with not incentivizing asset forfeiture, not incentivizing these massive arrests for low-level petty crimes, but rather incentivizing community outreach, community efforts, as well as going after the real violent criminals in the community. It will be an amazing day to see law enforcement go after corporate greed, local law enforcement go after corporate greed or medical malpractice. But unfortunately, local law enforcement leaders have decided that they don't have the power to do any of those things, and they leave it to the federal government. Despite the fact the Constitution gives them the power to defend life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, property, and so on and so forth. So I'll leave you with this. Before you make a decision to be pro-police or anti-police, make a decision to think, how can I fix the problem myself? And the first thing you need to do is research. You can hate the cops or you can love the cops. But both sides of the fence have a little bit of nugget of truth. Ultimately, police are needed. Unless you plan on being your own avenger of justice and doing old Western law, that's fine. But overall, people prefer a civilized, happy society. A society ruled by a republic. But we're losing that day by day. Sooner or later, law enforcement will no longer be in your local community. Sooner or later, they will not be local officers that get hired. Sooner or later, you're just going to have a real invading army of the federalized police forces, which have been planned on for a long time. The UN backed Obama's plan, and not to mention that they force and pressure these law enforcement agencies to follow the decrees with using things like a consent decree. I advise you take a look at that. Look at what a consent decree really does. On paper, the consent decree is supposed to help law enforcement agencies comply with standards of practices and be as efficient as they should be and not use force excessively. But also they use that consent decree to make law enforcement agencies do what they want them to do and to add unnecessary policies that generally law enforcement agencies don't really need to add. They can also implement in those consent decrees, as we've seen in Baltimore, the need to add race, age, gender, and address of these people that get stopped during traffic stops, which assists in the mass surveillance program. So people consider your local officers, men and women, are just doing their job. And also for the officers and pro-police people listening, people who don't like you for no reason. There are problems, there are issues that have arisen, and it isn't so much your fault, but it is so much the leadership's fault. The best thing to do is to be informed and understand what everybody's getting themselves into, both sides of the fence, and that's what we're here to do. So folks, remember this: always choose dangerous freedom instead of peaceful slavery. Thank you.